Dzień dobry, dzieci. It's the Flurza Experience, a show about card games, and it's episode number 22. My name is Matt, aka Flake. I'm joined this time by... Oh, I didn't come up with one. It's Pavel Burza. We know that. Maybe you can...
Easy.
Can you just help me with this time?
I am now the flesh and blood apprentice. I am learning. I wanted to use this opportunity to thank the whole Warsaw Flesh and Blood community for welcoming me with open hands, and say that probably I will be sucked into another card game. Yay! My wallet is already happy. Yay!
Oh, baby. I don't want to say that I'm responsible.
I blame you.
Do you?
I blame you.
Well, look, it's a good card game. It's an excellent card game, and it's so different from Gwent, and that's like...
And Magic.
And Magic.
Also.
It's very... I mean, it takes similar pieces from Magic, which is fine, but I mean, like, in all reality, it has such a unique approach to that framework, because we always talk about the framework of life totals and creatures and battling and whatever. This has a very unique approach, and what I like about this, honestly, is the fact that, given the fact that it's like hero-centric, everything revolves around the hero of choice, the heroes that you select are so... On the surface, they seem very similar. It's like, okay, you present attacks, you present blocks, you trade damage, that's all it is. But once you start fleshing out bigger strategies and understanding the ideologies of the heroes, you're like, holy Moses, there's so much to these. Like, one hero plays so much differently than every other hero. They're all so unique. And that's why, what I like about this game as well, about Flesh and Blood and like the community around it, is that there are, much like in Gwent and much like in Magic, that are people who are just like, I'm a blue player, or I'm a Grixis player, or I'm a this.
Yep.
There's this association, this adherence to their identity. Like, there are people who are like, I only play this one hero through thick and thin. If it's good, if it's bad, there's something called the League of Levia of players, because Levia is like one of the worst heroes in terms of performance, but there's like this group of hardcores that only bring Levia to tournaments and only play that hero, and they have gradually seen success. They've gradually like got top 8s with this really bad hero, and that's what I love about it, is people who just are like, no, I'm a Katsu main, or I'm a Dorinthia main. I love it.
Yeah, gotta love that. And I feel like also what you mentioned, like similar to what I see at Gwent, is like the community is very welcoming, since I feel like the game is still fairly new, although it's like 2 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like, I was surprised by the warm welcome of like open hands, like, we'll help you out, we'll teach you the ropes, how to play, because I only have 2 decks. Like, thanks to you, I have 2 decks. So I went and purchased Briar and Fi, or Fae, I don't know.
Yeah, Briar and Fi, yeah.
And Fi, yeah. So I'm about to decouple those and play as much as possible to kind of see the play style, because like I said, I only played before Oldham, which was a borrowed deck. So happy to get mine, double sleeved everything. Still reminded me why I love the experience of actually taking a card in my hand and putting it in sleeves, and then getting everything ready to actually go and sit down and play with people. So
it's a whole different experience when, like, part of the joy is there's always that pre-tournament panic sometimes where I'm like, okay, I have my list. It's on paper. I've practiced it online with people. I'm so comfortable. Now is the final mode. It's like when you do the dress rehearsal at a wedding or this and that, you go through it, and then it's literally the day before, and you're like, okay, you're there. I'm like, I need to get my shoes. Where's my belt? Where's my this? It's like, is everything going on? And you're sleeving your cards. You're going through your collection. I need one more copy of Blue Captain's Call. So you got to go hunt for it, and you pick it out. It's exactly that experience.
Gotta love it.
I'm so happy that you enjoy it, and it's just... Honestly, like, when I go to events now, also, it's not a matter of I'm excited to either cast the event or play in the event. I'm excited to see the people. I'm excited to be part of the community. It's so good. It's just so good.
That's what I always enjoyed about Gwent and being part of like this game for so many years. It's just seeing the community grow, seeing the community change, like getting to meet all the people like in person, but also online, getting to interact with them, like having people now on Twig. Like this is what I love about it. So totally 10 out of 10.
So when am I on Twig?
Like you said.
When am I on Twig?
I don't know. Probably like this week. It won't probably happen because of Open, because we're prepping for that. But maybe after open next week we can do something, because I don't have anyone for next week if I remember correctly.
Well, hey, I'm
So
always
we'll check your calendar. We'll check your calendar.
my paper. You want to check my calendar? I'll show you my calendar right now.
Full.
Well, I mean, it's this was a fuller month for me.
Nice.
Next month looks a little bit better, but it's rapidly filling up with stuff, which is a good sign.
Nice.
That's a good thing.
Good.
So today's
Episode 22.
Yeah, 22. What are we doing today?
What are we doing today? We're talking about new Gwent cards, because Black Sun is coming. So our latest card drop expansion called Black Sun, or Curse of the Black Sun, as I like to call it, because the story revolves around the curse, which was foretold by Etibald back in the day, saying that there will be women who are born with a curse, and once they kind of take reign and come out into the light, then the Black Sun will come, which will end the world. So it's a very but Etibald was a little bit crazy. You need to take that into account also. And so there will be some awesome characters in this one. Last reveals will happen during Gwent Open number 2, which is this weekend. And yeah, there's a lot to unpack. So we'll talk about some of the cards which you have already seen, and then we'll talk about sideboard strategies, because last time we talked about deck building. This time we can actually talk about sideboard, which also probably in my case will be more Gwent related. For you will be, for me it will be MTG related. For Gwent it will be kind of more tech options that you will bring or take out of your deck depending on where you're playing or in which meta you're playing. So
yeah, I think
that's on that.
I mean, that's a good, Gwent obviously doesn't have sideboards. We can even talk about, we've discussed about the possibility of what a sideboard style format would look like in Gwent, but ultimately sideboarding as a concept, there's the direct version, which you mentioned in MTG, where you play best of threes and you have a sideboard, and after game 1, you're allowed to swap out into your pool of 15 of your sideboard cards. Flesh and Blood is basically, since it's not best of 3, it's just a one-off. After your opponent reveals their hero, you can then sideboard. So you'll have to make a decision, like, is this, that's why there are certain decks, like for instance Lexi Livewire, which is like the elemental ranger. She could play control or she could play aggro. So it's hard to figure out, how do you sideboard when all you know is the hero? Yeah, big time mind games. Absolutely. That's why part of it is we mentioned this on many different episodes, not to mention this is a discussion I've had with Shinmiri in the past about, and just in general, when people want advice on how to advance and like, how do I go from rank 5 to pro? Meta-analysis is one of your best
most
keys.
Important.
Yeah, so that's why that's why sideboarding is so clutch. So we're going to talk about that as well. But the new Gwent cards is the first order of business, and I think that everybody was absolutely over the moon horny for new cards, and this is a good thing. Like, let's just get real now. We've discussed this as well. I don't think that the amount of cards is enough, but I think that any content drop is going to be great. And the fact of the matter is that if the 25 cards that are being pushed are all, inspired, relevant, great design, that is a good thing in itself. I often criticize, and I often am, I'm often a critic of how content in Gwent is dropped and sort of the progression and the pace in which it's released. But I will always be somebody who gives a massive thumbs up and am grateful for when the cards that do come are great, are unique. And I think that the previous set that came out, though it was only 22 or 23 cards or whatever, or 21 cards, the fact that they were impactful was great. And I like that because it was not just fluff and filler. The cards that are coming through have very unique and inspired design. And I really do like that.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. And also, I feel like with the previous drop, which was Forgotten Treasures, like players very quickly figure those cards out, and they're kind of now waiting for an injection of new stuff to kind of play around with and kind of have some fun with. But also, I feel like with the cards that we have already shown, we're kind of showing that we're sticking true to what our idea is for this year, which is lifting and boosting up existing archetypes, which are maybe underperforming. And a great example is Harmony, which I was hinting at this so hard for such a long time that I was like, it's an archetype and in Scoia'tael, which hasn't been seeing much play, but players really want it to be better. And that was kind of the idea. So I'm happy with what we're doing. I of course would like to see more cards, but I think we discussed this numerous times that it's a matter of capacity in terms of what we're able to do. Plus, us working on Golden Necker at the same time also kind of is limiting us. But yeah, I'm just excited that we're getting new toys to play with. I'm happy that for this drop, it has a very coherent, tight theme to it. Plus, we got to do a nice and cool trailer for it, so that will happen for launch day. So I'm excited for that.
Oh, big time, big time, big time, big time. And again, like when it comes down to it, new cards are great, and that's just the fun of it. And
that's what we love as card game players. We like new content, and whenever new content is coming in, we think about new strategies. We think about like where we will fit the new cards. We theory craft about them, and we also see community stumbling over them and thinking like, "What is this gonna do?" It's like, "Oh my god, this is." And I love people like claiming that the cards are already overpowered without even playing them, which is always my favorite thing.
Oh yeah, if it's not outrage, and it's just the way it is. Like people are already beating the drum of like this is OP, this is bullshit, BS or whatever. It's
but
like
new cards have to be a little bit tuned,
Well, I mean, again, yeah, you got to sort of give them an extra kick in the ass in order to make them appealing and played. Yeah. But then that's where power creep becomes an issue, and this is a whole other discussion which we've also had a million times. But again, the fact that people like I think it was Zubidoo who like was responding or reply tweeting or something or quote tweeting something where somebody was already bitching about the fact that like certain cards are going to be busted or something is like neglected or whatever. It's like, dude, the cards aren't out yet, and I had to remind him. I'm like, don't like. Reddit is the voice of the unhappy. It's the voice of the slighted and disturbed about things. The people who are actually enjoying things. And the fact is like keep in mind that yeah, you know what? 10% of if the common sentiment right now is that something is bad, all the people who are enjoying it are not on Reddit talking about it. And then if you fix that one thing that's upsetting, the people who don't like something else will then replace them. So there will be constantly a voice of criticism about things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everything needs to be constantly addressed over time. But this is a drum that we have beaten into a bloody pulp over half a year already. So we don't need to dig into that. But what we can dig into is something that I am not a fan of, which is scenarios. I think that new scenarios was an inevitability. I don't think, and like I just don't like. I don't like scenarios in the same way that I do not like quests in Hearthstone. I don't like objectives in Star Wars CCG way back when. I don't like. I'm trying to think of other. Like there are certain other like Runeterra has these landmarks that have win conditions on them. Like if you heal up to 20 health on your units, you win the game. Like those kinds of things. Those feel like quests or objectives or whatever. But those build around style framework cards I've never really been a fan of because they take up so much provision space and all of your strategy is there to support one objective, one major power play. And I've never really been a fan of those types of build around cards.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the type of person that likes scenarios. I like the idea for the whole thing. But I kind of get that it can be polarizing when it comes to players. Like, they either like them or they hate them. But I've also seen that there was a lot of requests for more scenarios. I think just having one per faction was not enough. So that's why more are kind of coming in with this. With this one, we kind of spoiled them with having the pack on the website. So yeah, I mean, I like scenarios. I like the new ones, and I just want to see how much they were actually influence gameplay, because I know that currently having one, most of them are run. Apart maybe for some factions, some of them don't see much play. But yeah, I'm just here to see kind of what will come out of this.
Oh, I agree. I agree. More cards is always great, and
Yep.
has I don't know if I can say it, but the major pieces, some of those focal points. For instance, the neutral legendary. Has that been? Will that have been released yet? I don't think so.
Nope.
Okay, so all you Dagon stands will have to wait for the release
Yep.
of Dagon. Unfortunately, you'll see the game text. But yeah, y'all be happy. But like the new cards here, what I like is that Harmony is getting a little bit of a boost. And
yes, finally.
right, and it was a great, but keep in mind, a lot of people were not around when Harmony was absolutely OP busted over the top. This is a true fact. For those of who were saying, well, Harmony leads love, it's been garbage forever. No, Harmony was tier 0 for
it
a
used
while.
To be so good. Yeah.
Harmony with Mystic Echo or whatever the leader ability was, the one that allowed you to replay a special card from your graveyard, was the way to play Scoia'tael. It wasn't even close. Forget traps, forget swarm, forget movement, forget control, no unit. Harmony was head and shoulders the best thing to do because it had the opportunity to potentially put 4 engines on the board on one turn. Like, it was nuts. It was obscene.
Remember when it would just like go off? When that thing went off, it was just like, damn, dude,
Yeah.
it was unstoppable.
Well, you were able to play like Imprisonment, which was, lock 2 units and deal 3. So your best option, because basically the move was you play Water of Broccolon to spawn 2 Dryads. Are they called Dryads? Druids.
Yes.
Dryads. What am I?
Dryads.
Dryads. I don't know why in my head I was, anyway. You played the 2 Dryad engines, then you use your leader ability to replay that special to get another. So you had 4. The best you can do was on Imprisonment, lock 2 with your ability, and then play a card from hand to kill or lock another one, and you still had 1 left. That was the best that you can do. Otherwise, most players are like, okay, 4 engines. I will answer 1. Then your opponent will likely play another card, and now they have 4 engines, and the other 3 engines are now 5s. And then there's 6s. And then it was over the top, the worst thing possible. It was the most powerful engine deck, I think, that Scoia'tael. I would argue that it was possibly one of the most powerful engine decks that Scoia'tael ever had.
I have to say it was.
Yes.
Like it was the most powerful. Like when we introduced Harmony for the first time, it was the most like heavy engine deck for Scoia'tael, and I feel like it was fairly overpowered. And that's why I think it also got nerfs very quickly. So yeah, it was a crazy one.
Yeah, and like the part about this that I think is also interesting to discuss is the fact that the leader ability, I feel like leader abilities are now kind of, I made a video about this like years ago when, I think it was when Caranthir's ability got changed to 9 provision and like, Overwhelming Hunger went from 3 to 2 charges, and the discussion was basically about how certain card designs and cards are getting they're getting changed, but they're also changing the landscape of the leaders and stuff that they are working around. Like there's when one card hits the board and hits the game, or hits, enters the game mode or whatever, there are so many different peripheral things that get hit by the shrapnel, like like for instance V or Vi. Like that card changed what Overwhelming Hunger looks like. Caranthir got changed because other cards could not interact with it, or should not have been able to interact with it properly. And one of those things is that Mystic Echo is no longer a leader ability, and I feel it's because Scoia'tael has some pretty big special cards that they can no longer play as a result, because Mystic Echo, 4 sets ago or 5 sets ago is a whole different reasonable thing until Water of Broccolon comes out, until even like those Echo cards come back and all this other nonsense. Like there's so many different ways that Mystic Echo could have been OP and busted, and it's just part of the reality. But Harmony, for those who do not know, is, in my opinion and Pavel's opinion apparently, the strongest Scoia'tael engine deck that has ever existed. And
I agree.
so there's a reason why perhaps it was on the back burner for a little while, because I think it had like a 3 to 6 month tenure as the deck, as the unstoppable, easy, fast pass to pro rank.
Yeah. Yeah, it was one of those decks that you could climb very quickly. I remember I was playing it at time. And if your engines were able to go off and were set up properly, and it was very easy to them to make the deck go off, you were just unstoppable with all the dryads everywhere and everything boosting itself. It was just, I mean, come on.
Yeah, you play
it was a harmonious deck.
It was an absolutely harmonious deck, and there was like you could play the Hawk. Like the beautiful part about it was that it was very, I don't want to say paint by numbers, but it was very simple to put together, because you're like, okay, Waters of Broccolon, and now I need, Waters of Broccolon and Mystic Echo to play it twice. That's your start. And then it's like, okay, Fauve and a few nature cards. And then it's like, all right, I need a dwarf. I need some elves. I need some beasts. I need, at the time, there was very limited in terms of what you could actually put in there, right? There wasn't too many different variations. You had your beast, your elf, your dwarf, your dryad, etc. But then you had to be like, okay, a gnome. Oh, I could put a gnome in here. Like, that's a good one. Like, let's put a gnome in here. Like, there's a lot of, and then there's the tree ants. Like, let's drop some tree ants in there. And you'd go through all of the different ways to trigger harmony. And it all worked because basically it was like, all right, you open with your engine pocket, and then it's like, based on what your opponent plays, it's like, okay, do I play the dwarf, the elf, the this, the that? But it doesn't matter because I'm going to get boosts off all of them. I don't want to say it was a deck that played itself, but it was a deck that had.
It kind of did.
It did to a degree. It had.
If you set up properly, then it would just it was just going.
Well, it was one where there was almost no bad moves.
Yeah.
Every move you made typically felt great, and then you had two possible finishers. You had the gnome, who would boost. It was basically it was a 6 that boosted for another 6 points around, plus all the harmony triggers, or there was the tree ant that you load up a row, and you put the great oak out there and slam points. Man, I missed that deck. I'm glad that harmony's back.
I'm also glad that it's back, but I just hope that it's gonna be contained more or less. Like, it's not gonna get into a place where old harmony, like I feel, I totally agree with you. Like, back in the day, if you set up the engines correctly, that deck was just, playing itself to some extent. If your opponent didn't know how to, didn't have anything in response for you or removal that was targeting properly, then I mean, it was just killing. It was destroying. And I remember when harmony started kind of falling off because there were some nerfs to Waters of Broccolon and stuff like that. People were already building like hybrid versions of the deck, which was a little bit slower to go off. But yeah, also still, once it went off, it was like, see ya.
And the best feeling was with that list is like, typically the way I would approach it was like, you don't want to go too ham in one round. So you play Waters of Broccolon, and that should usually have been enough for a round. And then another round is like you open with Mystic Echo, play Waters, and then play another unit to compound off of those. So then it would be 2 engines of 5, and oftentimes that was hard for other players to deal with. But if you got out of a round where you're going into round 3 where you had Waters of Broccolon and your leader ability, it was like, this is an auto win. How do you deal with this? I think the only answer to that was that people started packing like Scorch. Scorch, or at the time, old school Epidemic, which was burn down all the lowest units. That was definitely an answer as well. So the meta evolved. People would put in these cards to deal with it, but at the same time, if you did not have an answer off the first push of those engines, if you didn't have like a full board clean, you were basically forget it, because smart players would buff to keep one unit higher than the others, and the old school just. Remember, like, the old way to play Gwent was worrying about Igni. Like, that was always in the back of your mind. Yes. Remember beta Gwent? It was like, Igni. And you're like, oh, right,
Igni or Scorch. Everybody was afraid of Scorch. I remember there were petitions in the beginning, like, to change Scorch, because how can this card have this ability that it can just destroy the highest unit without anything? And I think that, it kind of... now, the way that it works, it kind of changed a little bit. But still, like, I hope that Scorch comes back into being something that players will be playing. And the same The same thing goes for, Igni being prevalent more. I think the other version of Geralt, resetting the row, will also be seeing more play and stuff like that. So yeah, this is something that will for sure happen.
Well, the people who are complaining about cards like Scorch or whatever are the players who don't play around cards like Scorch. This has always been fascinating to me to see, is that, okay, like, is it easier to completely change a card that you're having trouble with, or is it easier for you to just change strategies or to play around cards? It's easier for somebody to just not do anything and complain and wait for developers to fix it so the game is easier for them. But at the same time, like, I mean, Scorch was always an issue. And if Scorch is an issue, play a different deck or buff something above everyone else and go from there. But that goes part of teching and being able to sort of prepare for stuff. So, which is basically the main topic, I guess, that we're going to discuss in this episode, which is the art of sideboarding. And sideboarding can mean, I mean, there's the, standard definition of what sideboarding is, which is you have a pool of cards that are not in your deck that you're able to swap in and out from your main deck to fit a scenario and but in games that don't have sideboards such as Gwent, you could also extend that to mean proper teching strategies. Your sideboard would technically be like, before you click the find a game or the play button to go seek out and find an opponent, if you're suspecting that a lot of, for instance, let's say Harmony, if you're suspecting that old school Harmony was the name of the game, your teching, your sideboarding, quote unquote, would be that Scorch. And it's necessary because those are cards. Sideboarding to me, and I know I kind of mentioned this last week, but I kind of was thinking about it all week, and I was like, your sideboard is like jazz. It doesn't have to rhyme, but the person who puts it together, it makes sense to them. It has meaning to them. But for somebody who just looks at a sideboard, it's like it doesn't rhyme. The tempo's all screwy. There's no coherence. But in the grander scheme of things, with the intention around it, there's beauty in that, and there's actual substance to it. That's what sideboarding is.
Yeah, sideboarding is pretty much, I always see sideboarding as an art, especially an MTG, of figuring out your meta that you have and bringing all the tech options that you need for that meta in order to, in the second game, to kind of bounce back and kind of, mess up your opponent. And I feel like with all the stuff that is kind of teching, and also like bringing it back to Gwent, if it's the Heat Wave, if it's the Squirrel, if it's Peller with the Purify or anything like that, these cards are tech options that target specific decks, and either they will become super useful or they're just going to be bricks in your deck. So that's why they have a place in the sideboard. And like we talked previously, once you have your main deck strategy and you know what your deck is doing, and you have your win conditions and kind of your engines and your build up or whatever, sideboard are cards that you bring in order to maybe slow yourself down. But you can, with these cards, you can just stop your opponent. You can if it's Magic, it's like Graveyard Hate, Hexproof, anything like that. That is just going to be, or exiling specific things, or just more removal or more counters, or something that targets a specific color. These are kind of the ones that you're going to be bringing in. And like I mentioned in Gwent, it's just going to be either Graveyard Hate or Purifies, removal, so Scorch, anything that exiles, whatever you can do to kind of, mess up your opponent. And you see it, like if you squirrel the proper card, if you use Peller on a specific card, if it's like a Siri that is staying with resilience and you do it properly, you're just, countering your opponent's game plan. And this throws off the person that you're playing against. And I think that's also the psychological aspect of the whole thing. Sideboarding has a very, very, very intense psychological influence on players sitting down at a table. It's more easier to see actually in person, because in Magic, after you play the first game, you sideboard when you go into the second game, and you see how many cards your opponent is bringing in or taking out by just them putting them face down and kind of, adding them to the deck, taking things out. And you're thinking in your head, okay, if he's playing this, he's most likely taking copies of this out, bringing this in because he or she knows that I have this lineup. and you can kind of like, okay, let's swap my deck a little bit, change things a little bit. Maybe they won't expect this and this and that. And I will also bring in things which, mess up that person's game plan.
Yeah.
So it's a mind battle in between playing out the matches. I know that you mentioned to me in Flesh and Blood, it's different. When you see the hero that your opponent is playing, that is when you go into sideboard, because it's a best of one instead of a best of three, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you have to make decisions, and that's where knowledge of the meta and what that deck is supposed to do is so important. The best players in the world, the most successful players in the world, are there because they know more than just their deck. They know what their opponent's deck is supposed to be, and they know what the meta's supposed to be. In Magic, it's important to understand what you're going to be facing, so that the difference in Magic and Flesh and Blood is that in Magic you have to have a hard 60. Like, this is the 60 that I have to bring for match number 1. Flesh and Blood doesn't have that, but your hard 60 needs to have a game plan. It usually, what I've learned from friends of mine who are good at Magic is that you cannot be wishy-washy on your main 60. You have to have a game plan. Either, you have to be true to the nature of the deck. It's like, I'm an aggro deck, so my main 60 is going to be geared towards aggro. And if my opponent is weak to it, perfect. If they're not, we'll do some changes. Then your sideboard is where you do all the pivoting. It's like, well, they have a lot of flying, or they have a lot of hexproof or whatever, so I need a board wipe in order to be able to kill some of the stuff that I can't target. Maybe I need some more exile. I need some more planeswalker hate, things like that. That's where your second game. But like you said, your opponent is making the exact same decisions. Yeah. So that's the fascinating part. Some of the most nasty decks that I've ever played against in Magic were some that started off as control. So I would board into a slower game, and suddenly in game 2, now they're throwing 1 and 2 drops at you, and you're like, what the hell? This completely is turned on its head, and now I'm not prepared for this. And those are great decks. In Flesh and Blood, it's a little bit different because you have to make that call before you go in. But again, understanding what the meta is and saying like, okay, this is an Oldhim. The Oldhim's going to try to fatigue me, so I'm going to actually play 70 cards instead of 60 to give me a little bit more runway. I'm going to play a little bit more greedy because I'm going to need greed in order to beat this hero. Against more aggressive lists, like, all right, I got to put in some more defense reactions. I got to make sure that I have an equipment set that actually blocks. It's not utility equipment, it's more defensive equipment. Things of that nature. And being able to build that sideboard, the number one thing that people need to do is get off of the fact that sideboards are useless. And I think a lot of players, for some decks, sideboards were useless. Like Briar, when Briar was printed and Briar first hit the table, there were the UK national champion told me when we were practicing, I was like, okay, how about sideboard? He's like, screw sideboard. This deck is so good that it doesn't matter what your sideboard is. And if somebody is stupid enough to tell you that they're going to fatigue you, then you just add all your cards in from the sideboard into your deck because they're all much better than what they're playing. And that was the truth, because it's like, okay, I don't care what you're playing because my deck is just inherently better than yours. But for most of the decks, for 95% of the decks, those 5 cards that slot in and the 5 cards that slot out are so crucial because they're typically high risk, high reward. They're either bricks or they're Molotov cocktails being thrown through their window. Like they either ruin your day or they are absolute game-changing cards.
Yeah, I to be honest, what I think separates the good players from the great players is actually the fact that you know how to sideboard or you know how to tech. And I feel like it is it's something that I did not understand for a very long time when I was learning the ropes in Magic, when I was learning the ropes in Gwent, and when I'm even learning the ropes now in Flesh and Blood or any other game that I played, is actually knowing the game so well that you know with which things to bring in what amount of copies in order to carry out a win. And it's very, very difficult. Like, I think with Magic, I'm still learning it because the meta is ever shifting. And I also feel like when you're playing in person, people are bringing decks which you do not expect. But after game one, you're more or less able to anticipate like what you should be shipping in and taking out based off of that one game. But like I said, you don't know what your opponent is going to be bringing in and taking out. So you need to kind of anticipate what are the possibilities based on the colors. And I was also thinking about it, like I play two decks which are totally different in Modern. One is Azorius Control, which I think is a control heavy deck which has a lot of removal. And I feel like looking at the sideboard that I normally have there, it's more shifting the removal into removal that can be targeting specific things. So there's like enchantments that target, graveyards. So graveyard hate. There is more things with flash for like dressing down units and taking away their abilities and stuff like that. There's like fracturing gust, which just destroys all artifacts and enchantments for decks that are playing that. There's more counter magic, but there's also things like you might drop in an Emrakul because you need another win condition because you can be only winning with all of your planeswalkers. And then on the other spectrum of it, I have things like mono, like it's not mono red, it's Boros Burn, which is pretty much what you're bringing in is like things that exile creatures that you totally want to get rid of the board.
Mm-hmm.
There's Deflecting Palms, which pretty much work in a way that your damage actually goes through and cannot be blocked in any way. Anything that also has protection from black and red, like Sanctifier and Vec, which is there to pretty much be exiling stuff from your opponent's graveyard. And if another red or black card is supposed to get into from the battlefield to the graveyard, it gets exiled instantly. So you're stopping all those decks. And then it's once again artifact hate. And like stuff with like Smash to Smithereens, which is dealing 3 damage and destroying an artifact, which is super good. So you're targeting stuff which is super artifact heavy. And I feel like artifact and enchantments are things that you always will be keeping like in the back of your hand. And also same goes for anything which is creature heavy. Like you want to be not only destroying, but exiling those things out of the game so they cannot come back in any way.
Well,
and yeah.
I was gonna say, like, you're naming all these amazing cards and like sideboard cards. One of the, like, in my tenure in playing standard Magic around, like, I got in at Dominaria. At the time, it went all the way back to Kaladesh, Aether Revolt, and I played Onward to about Ikoria. And then I stopped playing standard. But to me, cards like Unmoored Ego, Lost Legacy. These are cards that I absolutely adored playing because playing in the Dominaria meta with Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, that was a nasty one. And I know you love that card because you're an Azorius control.
Played.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still
Great. But there was always, it was basically a situation where I would run, I think, 3 Unmoored Egos in my sideboard because once Teferi came out, it was really difficult to actually win or play the game. Or play the game at all. Yep. But playing Unmoored Ego in a scenario where I was able to play it, and hopefully they weren't able to counterspell it because that's obviously part of it. But Unmoored Ego was a card. It's like an ultimate sideboard card where if there's one card that your opponent is basically... their whole bread and butter is centered around all their eggs are in that basket, like, a Teferi Azorius style control. Unmoored Ego is a card that basically says search their hand, deck, and graveyard for one particular card and exile all copies of it. So if your whole shtick is to play Teferi or Nexus of Fate or whatever, buy Unmoored Ego
Nexus of Fate.
And get rid of all 4 of those cards in one swoop. Usually that was good enough for a concede off of your opponent.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. High risk, high reward is where sideboards kind of come in. And there are smaller tech, like for instance, the Kotley Hunter or Kotley Warrior, the Ixalan 2-drop that stops entering the battlefield effects. I thought those are fantastic sideboard cards because in reality, nobody wants to play a 1/4 2-drop that does nothing, but a 1/4 2-drop that stops all of your enter the battlefield effects. Oh my god, massive, huge,
so good.
So that's just kind of the beauty of it.
That card left a mark on you.
it did because at the time I was playing Oh man, I forgot it again. Not Golgari. Golgari plus blue.
I don't know.
Uh,
I always mix up
I
those.
always messed it up, and I knew. Anyways, either way, I would play that, and it was blue, black, and green was when one of my best decks. Like when I was really firing off and enjoying standard and winning games in standard a lot. It was because I was playing that color scheme, and yeah, that Tecatli bastard. I'm telling you, that's where beautiful parts of that, like, or those cards like that banish all graveyards or whatever. You're like, damn, man, like Sorcerer's Spyglass. Like these are really good cards, man. And then that's the beauty of sideboarding. Like, do you have a sideboard story where you're like, it just maybe not. You already knew the importance of sideboards, but was there ever a game where somebody sideboarded in a card that absolutely made you rethink your whole existence?
Yeah, I mean, I used to play a lot of burn, so it was very easy to counter that deck. So if someone brought anything that would give them hexproof, like
Oh,
ley
ley
lines,
lines.
I was just you know, wow, there goes my game plan. Although there were games, to be honest, that um, you could kind of maybe go around the ley lines if possible, but it was very hard. I mean, if you bring anything enchantment related, like any hate, then you're able to go through it. But I mean, it's difficult because you need to draw into that card. So
So
I
what
mean, those were the ones.
is Shatter the card that kills enchantments, or is that the one that kills artifacts?
Um, Shatter, like there is one, but there is one that Smash to Smithereens is artifact, and that feel like there hasn't been one that I've used like very recently for that itself. But it's because I mean you can still try to get your damage through with Goblin Guides and Swift Spears and maybe Eidolon if possible, but I mean you're pretty much stuck there.
Yeah, you're kind of screwed. Even like you could play something like Gutter Snipe, which every time you play a spell, it'll deal damage to the opponent. I remember playing a fun Gutter Snipe deck just for fun.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really cool card. I thought Gutter Snipe. I'm like, it just sits on the board, and every time I jam a spell, so you just like put 4 shocks, all these like 1-cost spells. Again, I adore Magic in the sense that there's so much space to build around. I just standard, it always just feels like a slog, and I just hate the economy of MTG in general. But
I mean, standard is too slow. The damage is also too slow. But if you play modern, everything is like turn 3 kills are very easy to execute if you get like like the best hand you can imagine. But I feel like also with standard, I think it's changing a little bit more. It's more evolving. So players who like a lot of things going on, they would probably go for that. Although I'm still playing standard. When I look at the decks that I play, like mono white aggro is still pretty good in that meta. So that's the one I'm kind of going towards. But with the new sets, there's like new stuff like enchantment heavy decks like Naya. I also like control, but Dimir control feels like it just kind of fell off the map a little bit in the recent one after New Capenna. So I'm kind of more always going back to the good old modern stuff, which I feel like Burn is a great example. It's one of those decks that hardly ever changes, but it still performs super well. And it's a lot of players bring it because it's just very good. And with control, I feel like Azorius is maybe not the strongest one right now, but still is one that I enjoy based off of like that I used to always be drawn towards like blue and white because I like counter spells on one hand. On the other hand, I like things like prismatic endings, other March of Otherworldly Light, and Solitude, which are just anything that exiles stuff that your opponent tries to stick to the board. And of course, my favorite card of all time, which is Supreme Verdict. And it kind of goes back to like this standard meta back in the day where it was really control versus aggro. I think it was in 2008 or 7. Ivan Floch was playing this standard deck, which had Supreme Verdicts and Sphinx's Revelation, which Sphinx's Revelation was a card if you played a specific amount of mana, so X and blue and white, you were able to draw that many cards and get that much life. So you were pretty much drawing cards, gaining life, and you were trying to keep yourself alive in that sense. And then you have one copy of Elixir of Immortality, which you would draw into, and that shuffled your graveyard back into your deck. So you're resetting your deck, and you're bringing back all the Supreme Verdicts and all the removals and all the counter spells.
You bastard.
And you were just waiting for your opponent to say, I had enough of this. And I think in the finals he played against an aggro deck, which was like white and green, and just pretty much destroyed it. And it was so good to watch that deck pretty much come back to life and be reused again. And it's, it's rinse and repeat pretty much. It's just so good. And I love when decks go into this mode where they feel like you're looping. Maybe it's not infinite, but still you're looping in a sense that, once you get this elixir back, it's fine. But if someone gets rid of that, well, then you need to be closing out the game as soon as possible. Which you kind of could with Jace at the time, Architect of Thought. So it was such a good deck. And I feel like blue and white still kind of focus on having very good planeswalkers, which is like Teferi Time Raveler, which was added later, and War of the Spark, which is very hated by the modern community. And then Hero of Demonaria. Now we have Wandering Emperor, which is also used for control aspects. And then Jace, the Mind Sculpture, which I think is the OG. It's one of the more expensive cards that I have. And I love that card to death, and it's really good.
So Supreme Verdict, first of all, the artwork on it, I'm looking at it right now, is amazing. I think it's great art. The Flesh and Blood, actually, their new set, Uprising, actually released a card which everybody is calling Teferi, because it has a Teferi like a Time Raveler effect where when it's on the board, your opponent cannot play or activate abilities on their opponent's turn. So
no instant shenanigans.
None of that stuff. And all weekend long, I was drafting Icelander. So Icelander wants to do most of the heavy lifting on the opponent's turn. And every freaking time, I would have this wicked ass deck, and then I was in I finished top 4 in one of the pre-release events playing Icelander, and I had I was in a draft pod with 8 people, obviously, and I was up against 2 other Icelanders drafting with me.
Yep.
And I was like, once I figured out, I'm like, I just looked around and somebody's like, how many Icelanders? And we 3 of us raised our hand, and I was like, oh no. I thought I thought I was doing okay. But in my head, I was looking at my deck. I'm like, how is my deck this good on Icelander when I was drafting against 2 others? This turns out that they were drafting poorly. Like, they were drafting the wrong style of cards. So I beat the other Icelander. And if there's one thing about Icelander in an Icelander mirror, the player who goes first has an enormous advantage because they're able to arsenal their card first, and they're able to do all kinds of shenanigans first. So I went second, and the dude I played against, a little cocky. He's like, oh, I'm going first, because in top 8, whoever's the higher seed gets to decide. So he was the higher seed, and he's like, okay, I'm going first. He's like, this is probably going to be over. He's like, I have advantage. I'm like, yeah. I ended up dumpstering the guy, absolutely posterizing him because he built the deck incorrectly. And that's just the way, again, this also factors in.
That happens so often, though.
Well, listen, this is another thing. Like, we talked about this last week, the importance of deck building. I understood what Icelander needed. Icelander needed blue cards. So I prioritized blue cards over, like, these huge, like, attractive cards that deal a F-load of damage, but you can't play them on your opponent's turn because you can only play blue cards on your opponent's turn. So I was like, I'm prioritizing blues. So any blue that comes my way, if it's an ice blue, I'm insta-snapping it. I don't care what Majestics are in this pack. I don't care whatever else is in this pack. That is what I'm getting. I'm getting blue cards. And they were like, we can get around with like just 10. I was like, it's 15 minimum. Like, that's the way. And I just posterized this kid. But then I face off against Dromai, and I am walloping Dromai until they find the dragon called Themai, and they played Themai, and Themai is basically your opponent can no longer play cards on your turn. So I was like, well, there goes Icelander's thing, and I had basically blew my load on the previous 3 turns doing damage to him, and I'm like, all my major burn spells were gone, so I couldn't even target the dragon with enough damage to kill it. So it just felt bad, and I ended up losing that game. But deck building, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, just to say, there's a Teferi dragon that's out there. Like, so for those who love Teferi, there is a Teferi dragon, and I hate it so freaking much because it is basically gate kept me from winning events. Because every time I think I have the most busted ass pool, I just get put up against a Dromai that plays Themai, and I'm like, mother of God, it just hurts. Every time.
Nice. Sounds good. I like stuff that blocks people like out. I've also been always drawn, but I never played like in Magic. You have like lantern decks and prison decks, like with stuff like Ensnaring Bridge, which works in a way that
Excellence Binding.
Creatures with power greater than the number of cards in your hand can attack, for example. So you're like locking out your opponent. And there's like lantern decks which let you like look at the top card of your opponent's deck, and if you don't like that card, you're able to discard it. So you're like playing around with their decks and like doing shenanigans. I like kind of those, but the deck that I've always played and I love playing the most is just a typical discard deck, which is just Inquisitions, Thought Seizes, Smallpoxes, Wrench Might, so anything that lets me look into my opponent's hand, discard chosen cards to mess up their game plan, try to get them to 0 cards in hand, and then play Iraq or Ensnaring Bridge, which will be just pinging them at the beginning of their turn by 3 damage all the time until they die a slow and painful death.
For people who only know Gwent, it's the equivalent of playing no unit traps, basically. It's just like, all right, your turn. Do what you got to do. It's dead. It's dead. It's dead. It's dead.
Dude, I hate the feeling in Gwent when you don't have units and you have cards in your hand that interact with units, and that's kind of where you get locked out. I hate getting locked out in Gwent, but I feel like when I'm still playing MTG, I'm still able, even if I feel that I'm locked out, I'm still able to play something and do something. But I also loved like the feeling of locking my opponent out and kind of getting things out of their hand, and kind of them just sitting there like, oh, I play a land and I pass the turn, and I'm like, okay, so let me look at your hand. How many cards do you have in hand? Okay, you have 2, so I discard this. You get pinged by 3. And then he's like, oh, I draw into this and I play a land. It's just like,
there's no better feeling sometimes when it was just like, if you're playing like Demir or something, it's like, all right, I'm going to thought erase you. Then I'm going to thought erase you again. And I'm going to keep thought erasing you. And then I'm going to board wipe you. And then I'm going to thought erase you. And then I'm going to unmordigo you. And then once I figure out what your strategy is, you're basically done. But sideboarding in general, and like if we're talking about deck, the important part about sideboarding is that your main deck needs to be your strategy. You need to basically have a core. In Magic, it's 60. In Flesh and Blood, it's whatever you want to be your core, because you can sideboard in and out prior to your first game. The sideboard needs to be, those are your meta calls. That's where you plug weaknesses. It's kind of like, imagine you're going on a journey to slay a dragon, and it's like, all right, well, I've got my armor, I've got my horse and whatever, but I don't know what kind of dragon it is until I get there, so I should probably bring something that can, deal with fire damage, but maybe it's an ice dragon, so I should probably bring something that's an ice protection, plus I don't know how long it's going to go, so maybe I should bring some extra food. It's kind of like you're packing for all scenarios, and you don't know what the scenario is going to be until you get there. Much in the same situation of like when you go to travel somewhere. Like when I go to Warsaw, I bring the stuff that I know I'm obviously going to need, but at the same time, I bring things that I'm like, I don't know if Pavel is going to want to play some cards or Magic, so maybe I'll bring a Magic deck. Maybe, I don't know if Vlad's going to want to play Magic with us, so I'll bring something for that. Like, I don't know if we're going to go out like to a nice place, so maybe I should bring like a nice shirt or some nice pants or something like that. You got to prepare for these things, and that's kind of what sideboarding is. It's giving yourself the best opportunity to capitalize on an opponent's weakness, but you don't know what your opponent is. That's what it is. It's sort of packing a cheat sheet to the test
Yeah.
with before knowing what the questions are. Like they do this all the time in in universities or whatever. A lot of times they're like, you're allowed to bring one. I mean, I'm not necessarily exaggerating, but some of them were like, you're allowed to bring one like 5x3 inch or 5x4 inch cue card with whatever the hell you want on it. You can write, song lyrics on there, or you can write actual notes. But you're allowed to bring one thing. So you have to prepare. What are you weak at? What do you need help with? And then you go with that. And sideboarding is, in my estimation, a skill that for players who feel like they're good, this is how you get over the hump. And if we're going to sort of translate this to, let's say, Gwent, which doesn't operate with a sideboard, same thing with Hearthstone. Hearthstone doesn't operate with a sideboard. Those kinds of games that don't operate with a sideboard, these are the calls that you have to make prior to actually jumping into a game, and they're very difficult to make because you don't have an opportunity to pull those cards out. And for instance, like if you were to name some cards in Gwent as being quote unquote sideboard cards, what are like 5 sideboard cards in your estimation, or 3 sideboard cards in your estimation?
Heatwave for sure.
I wouldn't. You know what? I don't even think. I don't mean to cut you off, but I think Heatwave is good enough all the way around. That's
why I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
It depends really on the deck and on the meta. I sometimes feel like things like choosing between Royal Decree or Necromancy in terms of like the card that you need for pulling stuff, which one to go with. But I think it's more of like a provision question.
Exactly.
But for sure, stuff like Mardrome, things like Peller, things like Squirrel.
Yes.
These for me are like number ones when thinking about like sideboard cards that I might need, but if they a lot of times also feel like they're kind of brick houses, right? That you don't might need. But if Skellige is being played a lot, then that Squirrel can change a lot.
Absolutely. But a card like, for instance, like Irden against Skellige is bad. Irden against Skellige is terrible.
He's a good sideboard.
No, exactly. They're cards that are never your first choices, but sometimes when you're at that part where you're like, okay, I have 22 cards in this deck, and I have 25 provisions left. How am I going to build it? That's where you're like, okay, what's the meta? Oh, well, it's a Harmony meta. Irden is absolutely going to be an important piece. Or it's a Go Tall meta. Maybe Scorch is the right answer because there's going to be a lot of equal things, So this is where Igni is.
I mean, Shiru can be an option for
Shiru, yeah. No, I think you're right. These are all any card that goes into your deck. If the decision is influenced by what you're playing against, it's a tech card / sideboard card. That's the sheer amount of it, because nobody is building around Irden. Nobody's doing that. Nobody's saying, I'm going to make a deck and it's going to start with Irden. Well, why? Why is it starting with Irden? That doesn't make sense. Same thing with Squirrel or Peller or stuff like that. These are all tech choices. And I think that some of the best tech choices are those high risk, high reward, like Irden. Because Irden against deck A might win you the game. Irden against deck B might be a 3-point card that bricks and does nothing for you.
Yeah, exactly.
It might actually be negative points. Like it's happened where it's either my opponent has a lot of units that are damaged, and on my side they're all boosted. So if I play Irden, I'm legit playing it for negative points. Like I've been in a scenario like that, and it has never felt good. So those are the high risk, high reward pieces of sideboarding, and it's, to me,
only good option is when your whole row is like damaged, then you just bring them back to life and get a little bit more points. But I feel like it's a card that is only used to just get rid of boosted stuff here on opponent's side, and that's its primary use. And then apart from that, secondary use is if you have a lot of stuff that is damaged, that you bring them up to a little bit more life. But I feel like the amount of points lost and gained here is just it's totally different. Different side of the spectrum.
I agree. So we're going to move to the mailbag shortly, but I want to take this opportunity to show these off as much as possible because I'm so happy with these. I'm going to be showing these off also on Instant Speed Podcast as well, but I want as many people in the world to see these. I got these in before, so I was in Ohio this weekend, so I didn't really get a chance to show these off. I, for the first time in my entire life, got cards commissioned, like artwork. I am
alter art,
altars. I am over the effing moon in terms of the investment I made. Like, again, I'm in a position where it's not always easy for me to freely spend money. However, I had some money to spend, some fun, and I was like, let's support the community. Let's support somebody who's awesome. I am so over the moon. Check these out. So the hero, this is from Flesh and Blood. The hero is Katsu, which is one of my favorite heroes, and they are a ninja, like a samurai. And I got this commissioned. I don't know if you could see it.
Oh,
There's some glare there. Let me see if I can't fix the glare real quick. Get like a dark screen, but this is it's hard to see. You can see yourself, but this is Luke Skywalker from Luke Skywalker from The Mandalorian, and the two weapons that he uses they're called kodachis. They're like swords. I got them commissioned
lightsabers.
to be. There's Luke's lightsaber and Anakin's lightsaber. The two lightsabers that Luke Skywalker uses in his lifetime. So,
are you actually going to play those, or are they just going to be?
They're slabbed, right? They're slabbed in here because I'm so over the moon protective of these cards. But
so good.
These are going to be like Katsu is right now in a position where it's not a strong hero, but it's still my favorite. But when I'm playing for fun, I am abso-freaking-lutely busting these out, and I don't care if I win or lose because I'm already winning because of these. So
you gotta support the altar art community. These are artists that take an existing art and do some crazy stuff out of it. And I've also seen this in Magic. Like people who do altars, I just follow them just to see the work that they're doing because it's freaking amazing. And sometimes, like, because in Magic there's a lot of cards that if you know the ability of the card, if it's like a lightning bolt or something, Wizards themselves, they do like multiple versions where there's no text on it and it's like a full art. But there's also versions where people take the existing art and they extend it throughout the whole card, make it into a whole thing. It's just so amazing what they do. And shout out to everybody who's doing altars because you're freaking amazing artists. And this is all done by hand, so it's super unique.
This artist is it's from Blackwing Studios. So if you go look up Blackwing Studios, the artist's name is Mara Ferris. She is amazing. I've met her in person multiple times, and that's what basically was like, you know what? I'm like, I met this person, good person. I saw their work. I was like, I have an idea. Can you make this a thing? And they're like, what are you looking at? So I sent them like still images from The Mandalorian. I sent them all these like graphics of what the lightsabers look like. And I'm like, only if you can make these accurate, because I don't want an interpretation. I want,
of course not.
And I was
Star Wars lore master needs to have things that is lore accurate
to the point where I was like, his hand better be in a glove. I swear to God, and it was. So I was like, sweet.
Has to be.
Yeah. So over the moon. So cheers to Mara at Blackwing Studios for absolutely blowing me away with this work. But
and if you don't know anything about altars, like try to like see their like communities, like Facebook groups, there's Reddits, there's stuff like that. And once you see kind of the best altar artists, like follow them on Instagram and see their work. Like it's amazing. Like altars need to be seen in order for people to understand kind of how incredible they are.
So shall we move to the mailbag, my friend?
Of course. Let's do it.
All right.
Welcome back to the mailbag where we answer your questions coming through Reddit today, mainly. And the first one is from Kupor. Hello, Kupor. Nice to see you. What do you think about Hearthstone copying Gwent mechanics now? Ugh.
Okay, so I got things to say about this. I have always been under the impression that many Gwent people who play Gwent a lot of them likely have not had a lot of experience with other card games, and there's nothing wrong with that. You enjoy what you enjoy, and like not everyone needs to have a laundry list of experience with other card games to enjoy something. That's not the thing. What made me absolutely chuckle was when I read this, and I'm like, and I saw a completely separate thread that Kupor put out there, and I was like, this has to be a joke, right? Because
conspiracy theory, like
first of all, I don't know if you guys are aware, Kupor, but how do I feel about Gwent copying Hearthstone with Shield? Because Divine Shield was a Hearthstone thing before anything else. So maybe Gwent copied Hearthstone with Shield. How about Defender? There's something called Taunt. Taunt's a thing. How about Scenarios? Because I'm pretty sure quests from Hearthstone came out first, and those are pretty much similar cards. You have to complete 2 different chapters to get rewards. So
card games copy card games.
Like, how many different names are there for lifesteal? Or there's lifesteal, there's
life gain,
lifelink. The fact of the matter is that card games are always borrowing ideas from other card games. Defender is just Taunt. It's just that's the way it is. Which is, I think, in the Elder Scrolls Legend is called Guard or something like that. It's the same effect. In Mythgard, it was called I forgot what it was called, but it had a similar effect. No, in Mythgard, there was a term called, I think it was like Lurker, which was like the inverse of Taunt. So it was like if something had Lurker and it was adjacent to another unit, you could not attack the Lurker until you killed the adjacent unit. So it was like the inverse of what Taunt was. Overrun, Overwhelm, Trample, all different names for the same thing. First Strike, Quick Strike. So
Hearthstone doesn't come from nowhere, please.
Yeah,
please,
Hearthstone isn't copying Gwent, which is makes me absolutely. You think Blizzard gives 2 Fs about Gwent? No offense to Gwent, but you think that Hearthstone gives 2? Hearthstone is like on this cloud that is about 30,000 feet above the highest peak, and doesn't give 2 Fs about anything except cosmic radiation. Like, that's the only thing on their radar. That's not to say that Gwent isn't awesome, but Hearthstone isn't copying Gwent. Are you out of your mind? Like, why? Because they use the same term? Like, let's be real. Shield, Divine Shield. Let's first resolve that borrowing and stealing, if you want to talk about copying or whatever. Let's resolve that one before we go on to this one. So
yeah, I mean, please, like, keep an open mind. There's nothing in card games which has been reinvented. Like, there are, of course, instances where new things are being created and brought in, but it's very, very rarely that something from, is being designed from out of the blue and someone is marking it as like, yes, we're the first ones to do it. And there's no copyright on stuff. Of course, the mechanics are named differently, but there will be stuff coming from different card games into other card games. Like, a lot of people could say that the majority of card games that are out on the market right now, they have been all copying Magic because Magic was one of the first ones, but it's not that way. Like, it doesn't have, it's 100% copyright on anything, and none of these abilities and mechanics cannot be copied by anyone else, because that would be impossible. Plus, there's so many, like, board game style card games which have abilities that you might even know about because you never played them, but there's also, like, people designing those and creating stuff for them, which later goes into the bigger names of the card games that are maybe well known. And it's not, you can't say that one is copying another, because, like, all these things have been already there and someone else copied it from someone else, right?
Like, how do you reconcile Veil and Hexproof? Why, or Immunity and Hexproof? Like, why did Gwent copy Magic when it comes to this effect?
Why? I don't know.
You guys are terrible.
I feel like even if you look at the people who design cards in our team and other teams are people who come from different card game background, and they will either be trying to introduce something totally new which hasn't been used yet, like, ever, but the majority of them will be basing off their design and their ideas of the things that they already have done or played or seen. So it's not that it's all these things are kind of, they go out of your head and you forget about it and you're like, oh, we're going to create something from scratch and reinvent the wheel, pretty much, which is very hard to do in card games, because I feel like a lot of things have already been done. They have been set, they have been agreed on. And I mean, there's things that make card games very distinctive from one another. Like, you can see a lot of card games which are copying what Hearthstone kind of introduced, or there's a lot of card games that are trying to copy Magic and what they did. And then once in a while, you get card games which are very unique and they bring something different. They have a different gameplay style. They don't have the land aspect or the mana aspect, mana crystals or whatever, and they just do something totally different. I think Gwent is a great example that we always kind of go back to, like a game that plays very, very differently, best of three, based off of the resources that you have in your hand. Same goes for Flesh and Blood, like having this and the armor and stuff like that. Like this is for me, like playing it and getting to learn the game right now. It's the play style of it's very unique, like pitching cards in order for you to play other cards. It just makes so much sense, and kind of using these resources, and it's such a cool thing. And there's also like deck builder games, which are more board game style, where you're just drawing something one per turn and you're trying to create something out of this. And there's so many things to kind of unpack here, but I feel like in the end, I think all card games are kind of catering to the card game player, because if you're playing something and you know the mechanic from somewhere else, you're kind of like, oh, I remember this. This is just this in the other game, right? So it's more familiar, but it's also something that gets you into the new game, for example, that you're learning much easier. So the entry point is just, you're like, oh, I recognize this. I know how to play this, right?
Out of curiosity, what are they claiming Hearthstone copied? It's like a keyword or something?
There was an idea that our new infused keyword is a direct copy.
So when did Hearthstone release Infuse?
I have no idea.
Because,
I don't know.
Because Infuse isn't even out yet. So are they suggesting that there are spies? There's like Blizzard spies amidst the developer team? You guys need to figure it out. I think Jean is Jean or Malegian like a Blizzard agent? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, one of them for sure.
What are they copying? Like, this is what I'm trying to figure out. Like, Infuse isn't even printed yet. It got announced like a couple days ago. So if you're suspecting that Hearthstone is also doing it, it's probably because they also announced it recently.
Yeah.
So the timelines don't even match up unless there is a mole within CDPR that is working for Blizzard. So, I get it. It's a wide world of cards out there, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just Gwent. Gwent isn't the alpha dog that everybody is trying to catch up to. Gwent is its own thing. Gwent doesn't care about, what Hearthstone's doing, and I can guarantee you that Hearthstone doesn't give two S's about what Gwent's doing. That is probably true. What I wish Hearthstone would copy from Gwent is their economy, because holy Moses. Hearthstone's economy is like... the analogy I wanted to use is so inappropriate that I'm not even going to say it, but it's terrible. All right. Next question. Phantom Mag at -6 karma. That's the ones we want, baby.
This is what we love.
Heck yes. Every time I see those negative karmas, I was like, this is where the good stuff is. It's either absolutely stupid, typically, or it's somebody asking for premium tokens. For the record, all those out there who have begun to, on our behalf, respond to these questions and say, do you not get it? They don't answer questions about balance or tokens or whatever. Like, stop wasting their time. Thank you. Thank you for making it so that I don't have to say June 1st. That's all I have to say. So thank you so much.
June 1st. Yeah. Perfect.
So Phantom Mag asks if you can be another person for one day, anyone, actor, celebrity, even Jesus. I will say this, if I'm going to be Jesus for a day, earlier life, not end of it, not the last. Like, just say it. Whom would I choose and why? This is a good question. I like this question. Who would you be?
I would be an elite cyclist. If I had to choose, I would either go Matthew Van Der Poel or Filippo Ganna. Filippo Ganna is a time trialist, so a guy goes very fast, and Matthew Van Der Poel is more of a universal sprinter / long day kind of, but he also rides mountain bikes and cyclocross and stuff like that. So it'd be nice to see how much different it would be to ride a bike as an elite compared to me being as an amateur cyclist. So it'd be nice to have that comparison. And ideally, when the Tour de France is around, it would be nice to be in his body and able to like go through like a hellish stage in the mountains or something like that, or on a time trial, just to see if I can push like 1,200 watts, on the crank with my legs. That would be incredible to be like to have the mindset and the mind state and to be in a different body. That would be crazy.
That's mine. That could be our cop duo name. Like if we ever had a buddy cop movie, we could be Crank and Watts.
Perfect.
Are you Crank? You got to be Crank, right? Or am I Crank?
Yeah. I don't know.
One of us is Crank and one of us
both
is...
of them are cool.
I mean,
I don't know.
it's like Crank and Watts on the case, and then
we need an awesome like muscle car.
No. If you're a cyclist, we have to have.
We just cycle.
You cycle. I'm in the sidecar.
Nah.
And you're just cycling there with
now it's a parody.
Yeah, you're Crank and I'm Watts, and it's just like, and we show up, and I've got like the goggles on and stuff like that. But you're in full. You have like your cycling uniform is like it's the standard like cycling uniform, but the design makes it look like you're wearing like formal, like a suit and tie. But I'm actually in the suit and tie, and I show up and I'm like working the goggles and stuff like that. Crank and Watts on the case.
Crank and Watts.
Exactly. Right. If anyone out there wants to make our day, if you guys can Photoshop us as Crank and Watts, that would be good. Like on a movie poster, like a
10 out of 10.
Yeah, like a 80s action movie style poster. That would be good.
We need the Pabs on this. He's awesome.
Who do I want to be? I was at like the easy answer to me is someone like Elon Musk.
Solo.
Well, yeah, but like I'm guessing that. Well, yeah, I kind of want to freaking be Han Solo. That would be so good. Or Peter Parker. Those are great. But like if we're talking about non-fictional,
damn,
like that's a good one. Like let's be real. But fictional characters is kind of too easy. I like the easy answer for me was like Elon Musk because you have money and power and you can do whatever the hell you want. Plus, I just want to see where the bodies are buried, kind of thing. But I was actually thinking I would want to be, just for if it was just one day, I would want to be a really popular. Like I want to be like Justin Timberlake at like performing at Madison Square Garden or something like that.
Ooh.
Like I want to be
energy there. Damn,
that's it. I want to be Justin Timberlake. Like doing a concert at Madison Square Garden. Like I have all his talents, I have all that stuff, so I want to be on the stage in front of 30,000 people going crazy. I want to be singing songs, I want to be performing, and like that 24-hour period for me is like starts at noon on that day and runs till noon the next day. And after the concert, you go out in New York, you have a good time, you're treated like a god, everybody's amazing. And I would do, you do a whole bunch of that. All the things that, like, when I see concerts, I'm like, I would love to, you toss your drumstick out into the crowd, you give out your guitar pick, you take off your shirt, you throw, like, I would be the most, like, fan-friendly kind of dude I would sign autographs for, like, 8 hours.
Everything.
Yeah. That's the kind of, that's who I would, what I would pick. Because I was also thinking, like,
amazing.
Being a pro golfer, but a pro golfer needs, like, 4 days to win a tournament. Can't do that. So,
yeah.
No, I like these. All right. There's your answer.
Next one. A controversial name. Very controversial. Are there any plans to rework how weather currently works in the game? No.
Yeah.
So there's a long-winded...
Yeah, I read the long-winded
opinion.
like sort of add-on to this, and basically what it said was that the weather is kind of not necessarily like boring, but it's like it's sort of you drop it. There's nothing really your opponent, like when you drop it on an opponent, all they can do is really avoid it. And then this is the reason why I put this in here, Pavel, is because they suggest bringing it back to beta status, which was when you drop weather on a row, every unit on that row becomes one strength. Like it's not feasible.
It's a reason why we changed that, right?
It's OP beyond OP, which turns like Gwent used to be the game of last say. Who had last say? No. Typically wins 80% of the games. And that's where the Dagon leader ability was so popular because either as Dagon, if you had last say, you either ice their biggest row to remove all their points, or if your row is iced, you remove the ice with clear skies. And that's the thing. There are ways to get rid of weather. They're just not efficiently played. There's no efficient way to remove weather. I miss those days. Remember those, every faction had... there was like Water Hag or something like that, where every faction had a unit that either spawned a spell like Lacerate or Manticore Venom or something. They had Clear Skies and they had a weather effect. It was a 3-pack. It was like a utility unit in silver that was so good. It was so good. And those were efficient because you didn't have to waste a spot for a Clear Skies if they weren't playing weather. You had this card that would able to do other things. So unfortunately right now there are no cards like that exist in Gwent.
Yeah, I'll just bring back a flashback. Remember the meta where you had to carry clear skies in every deck in order to survive because weather was so prevalent and people were like, changing the whole row to ones and then lacerating everything. And you could say, okay, good game, we're done. Like everybody played clear skies. There was a meta where everybody had clear skies just to run away from weather and just felt like it was such an oppressive mechanic that if we brought it back to those old days, I feel like people would just get pissed off because you like two plays and your whole game plan is just
Basically,
done.
you can spend 9 turns establishing a board and running a strategy, and then your opponent just removes all your points with their leader ability. Like, can you imagine that? Imagine a leader ability that was worth 70 points, like with no conditions. It was just point at a row and delete all their points. That's the reality of it. But yeah, there was definitely that. Remember old school Fog? When you played Fog, it would pull out all the Foglets out of the deck and the graveyard. But when you removed Fog, they'd all go away. So it was this tug of war. Like whoever bit first usually lost because the other player had the advantage to either remove it or reapply it. So Gwent really is better for removing that because it was a main element of last say wins, which is not always the case anymore. Last say obviously has an advantage. However, it was so huge that it was like an 80-20. It didn't even matter what the hell was going on. As long as you preserved last say with a major push, you were just over the top of your opponent. So that's probably why weather is, at the very least, will never go back to beta because of what Pavel said. It was,
thank God.
Yeah, it was beyond OP. What like if you were to estimate like top of the ladder, Dagon as a leader ability with the weather / clear skies / rally. Remember rally was like clear skies was like either clear weather or rally, which was play a random bronze card from your deck.
That's when we changed the cards, so it actually had some utility.
Exactly. It gave it a little bit of extra potential for it. But what would you say the pick rate at the top of the ladder was for Dagon? 75%?
Very big. Very big. Yeah, something around that was very high.
So you want to talk about...
That's why people still remember him and want him back in the game, because he used to be a champ just with that ability, which people thought like, what? Weather? What? That's nothing. It was that in that meta, it was a lot.
It was everything.
Like, think about like resetting everything on a row to 1. Think about like having a fully boosted row with like crazy numbers, and then someone just poo-pooing on your game plan.
It didn't even have to be boosted because it would just set the strength of all units to 1, no matter what it was.
Yeah.
So Dagon, I think at the time, Dagon was, I mean, I've been playing Gwent for 6 years, or since 2016, I think. So yeah, 6 years. Dagon is still, in my opinion, the strongest leader that has ever existed in Gwent, and it's not even close. Not even close. Whatever deck you think has been strong, if you never experienced beta Dagon, you have no idea just how oppressive it was, to the point where you had to play
versatile. Super versatile.
Yeah, there was no downside to it. Absolutely no downside. Not to mention, you could always just use it to play Fog and thin out your deck by 3 units. Easy. Like, no problem. Yeah, that's definitely not coming back, and I'm okay with that.
I'm also okay with that. More than okay with that. Players would hate us for that.
They'll hate you for everything. Don't worry about it. Last question from Java and Beer. Java and Beer, coffee and beer, dude, all day long. I don't know if were you ever a fan? I don't know if you got it in Poland, but the Drew Carey show.
I watched it, but I think it was only when I was in the States. But here, I don't think it made it.
So the Drew Carey show, part of the overarching story was he had a side business that he ran out of his garage, which was he brewed his own beer, which was called Buzz Beer. And the whole concept of Buzz Beer was that they mixed coffee and beer. They're like, oh, we'll get both markets. And it was like a huge success. So when I hear Java and beer, all I think about is coffee beer, which is like, it's a thing now. Dude, Coca-Cola has now coffee and Coke mixed together. I don't know if you knew this, but I was saying, I'm like, the second that they release like a diet vanilla version of Coke coffee, it's over. Like, that is basically the end of my life. That is all I'm going to be drinking. Yeah, it's dangerous.
I don't drink Coke, thankfully.
Oh, you're a smart man. So the question from Java and Beer is, who wins, Pavkov Gale versus Han Solo? And I think that this is...
That's an easy one.
Well, I. What's the answer then?
Han Solo.
Oh,
he has a
thank
freaking
God!
blaster.
Thank you, thank
He
you,
has a
thank you.
blaster. And before Bafko loads the arrow, he's already like turned to dust.
Yep. One of the things that I always
Plus,
fall back.
remember, Han shot first.
Han did shoot first. Pavko's gonna be like, he's gonna be there, be like, want some leaks?
I'm gonna be the Greedo or something.
Yeah,
like,
you're gonna be there talking about
Solo.
yeah, Uta Guta Solo, and he's just gonna absolutely
fry me
completely. Crispo, definitely big time Crispa.
Kentucky fried leeks.
Oh, that's actually sounds delicious. You can deep fry anything and make it taste delicious. But
exactly.
I gotta say Han Solo, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't think that Pavko is an aggressive person, so they will never shoot first, like you said. They will always respond. And Han is fearless in many regards. Like, for instance, when he's a
badass.
When he's on Cloud City and they go to dinner, and it turns out that Vader's there at dinner, the first thing that Han does is pulls out his blaster and fires off 2 shots.
Yeah.
Not even thinking. The most badass, feared entity
Trigger
in the
happy always.
Oh, dude, just this is why I kind of dislike I don't want to say what they did to Han Solo, but the Han Solo prequel movie, or like the Solo movie, they really Disneyfied him, where they made him righteous, they made him virtuous. That was never how he was supposed to be. He was a pirate, he was a drug smuggler that worked for crime syndicates and had killed a bunch of people. He was a pirate. That was his whole gimmick. And the whole thing was that he fell for a stronger, more, he fell for a strong-minded, strong, brave woman that was Leia. He had somebody who he finally was like, wow, you're not just my equal. You're somebody that I can respect. Like, you're somebody who I see. He was also a narcissist. Like, he was very much self-absorbed, but he saw someone.
I still remember him and her interaction during the Battle of Hoth, where he's leaving and he's like, and she keeps on like calling him names. It goes like scruffy looking. Is like, what do you mean scruffy looking?
Yeah, that's the one that gets
him. Call him all the worst stuff, and him kind of being like, Your Highness, I'm leaving and stuff like that, which was just. It's such a great interaction, but it also shows off his personality, that he doesn't care. He's like. He even shows like multiple times, especially in the old trilogies, like he cares about himself, but then through the process, you see him evolving and changing and actually caring about others and also these people that he meets along the way, which, it's less about the money, less about the mission. It's more about, this friendship that they created here.
That's the beauty. There's so many good lines from Star Wars that people kind of don't forget. Like the one where, the ship is not running, and then Leia's like, you want me to get out and push? And he's like, yeah, that might help. Like, like they're in the blackness void of space, and she's like, she makes a comment, and he's like, yeah, that'll help. Get out of there. And that one, or the one where he refers to her as a committee, and she's like, I'm not a committee. And it's just, there's some good lines, but it's got to be Han Solo, because Han Solo honestly is a murderous thug. Like, that's.
I appreciate the comparison, because Pavko is a hawker smuggler, so he smuggles things to the elves and sells it to them, which is something that doesn't happen very much in the Witcher universe, because normally, like, humans and non-humans and elves and dwarves, they don't interact with each other because humans are portrayed in the universe as racist, and humans are always fighting against the elves, and elves always feel superior to the humans. And the hawkers are kind of the ones that are kind of helping to smuggle and sell stuff. So it kind of makes, I like the comparison, right? The comparison there is very nice. But yeah, I mean, unless you're freaking Legolas, who, is firing like a machine gun arrows, then maybe if you get like an upper hand. But I feel like if Han Solo saw anything in terms of like a threat from Pavko, he would just take out the blaster and shoot him. And I think just this is like technological like rift between them is not something that, unless they both have blasters, and I don't know who has a better reaction time, but I think Han Solo is more think less, like shoot first, ask questions later.
Yeah,
And Pavko is more like, I'll ask questions first and then I'll fire, and then you know he's already turned into bacon.
all things equal, I think it would go to the individual who had the initiative, and Han is somebody who always takes the initiative. Han is always the one who is like you mentioned, shoot first, ask questions later, and if there's one perfect example of that is when they're rescuing the princess and they're in the detention cell block and there's all kinds of commotion, and then someone asks like, "What's going on up there?" He's like, just a slight weapons malfunction. Everything is optimal here. Everything is good here. How are you?" And then the person's like, "Wait, who is that? What's your operating number?" And he just shoots the console.
Shoots the thing.
And he's like, "A boring conversation anyways. We're going to have company."
Same thing happens when they're in the garbage crusher disposal thing. He like starts shooting and then the beams start like jumping off of stuff. He's like, well, that was a great idea.
Yeah. He almost got us killed. Like, it's just so good. All right. Well, that's it for the mailbag this week. And good discussions again about everything, frankly, and new cards are coming everywhere. As even Flesh and Blood has new cards that came out this week. So awesome stuff.
The more, the better. This is what we love. This is our league season right now. We're harvesting all the good stuff and thinking about what to play, where, and which deck, which faction, which whatever, where to put it in. And it's just, I love this time.
When you said so, this is and it's open weekend. So massive tournaments happening in Gwent, which is always good to see. I'm just super stoked, man, all the way around. Card games are my life, and this makes me super happy.
Amen.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to the Flurza Experience, a show about cards, but so much more. I am Flake, as always, joined by Pavel Burza. Don't forget, you say it.
You're not losing if you're learning.
You're not losing if you're learning. Be kind. We'll see you next time.
And keep playing the game. Keep playing the game.
Bye.
All the game. Bye.